All right, I think we're live. Hi, everybody. This is Marc Brackett. I'm delighted to be here with you tonight. I have to admit, I'm feeling a little bit nervous about this first book club night on Facebook Live, um, but we're going to jump right in. So, firstly, welcome. I know that we have a couple of thousand people who have registered for this, which just blows my mind. Super excited about that. Just a few things. I want to kind of set the tone of the entire time we're going to be together. So we're going to do about 45 minutes of talking, of reflecting. I'm going to be answering questions from people that sent them in, so thank you for those. Um, and what else? We're going to do this for about 5-6 weeks, actually 6 weeks, every week, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 45 minutes, and let's just get going. So I'm going to start with the very first question that was asked of me, which is, why did you write this book called Permission to Feel? And what I want to share with you are a few things. One is that, when I was writing this proposal and thinking about this work for the last, I don't know how many years, 10, 15 years, people were saying, well, why aren't you writing a book called Emotional Intelligence for Leaders, or Emotional Intelligence for Educators, or for Parents, or whatever specific area? Why do you want to call this book Permission to Feel? And there's a lot of reasons for that. And if you read the prologue to the book, you'll know a little bit about the story behind it. And I'll share that in just a moment. But to me, the skills of emotional intelligence, which we're going to talk a lot about over the next couple of weeks, are really important. And you'll know why. And if you've read, you can see the reasons. But I think there's something before that. I actually really believe that we as a nation, we as families, as people in the workforce, have just not given ourselves the permission to have our feelings, to have our own, and to really help other people have the permission to have theirs. So let me jump into the prologue. So the title of the book, I wrote about this briefly in the prologue, but let me share with you the real story. As you may know, my day job is the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence. I'm a professor at Yale in the Child Study Center. I'm also the co-creator of Ruler, which is an evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning that's now in, 2,500 schools across the nation. And in the corporate work I'm a co-founder of OG Life Lab, which is a digital learning system for the workplace on emotional intelligence. And so while my day job is really running around the world trying to get people to talk about their feelings and implementing Ruler in schools, here in Connecticut, we've made a commitment, and it's a big one. It's to make Connecticut the first emotionally intelligent state. So anyway, I'm invited by the superintendent of a big district here in Connecticut to do this work. And everybody was warning me that this district had not been doing very well, that, the superintendents had been, coming and going for years, that there was a lot of bitterness. And it was a highly disadvantaged area. Many of the students are living in poverty. And anyhow, so the superintendent, the new one, said, Mark, we're going big or we're going home. Like, I want this in all of our schools. So we set up a training for all of the leaders of the school. And we are now in this hotel with 100 principals and assistant principals. And it's the first day of training. I think it's going pretty well. And I'm at lunch, and someone is standing behind me, this kind of big guy who happens to be a principal of a school. And I said, so how's it going? And he goes, it looks like the lunch is going to be pretty good. And so it's like, oy. And I was like, okay, thank you. And anyhow, I decided to make him my project. And so what does it mean? I was like, I'm going to find a way to reach this guy. Like, I'm going to reach this guy. Long story short is that it's now the end of this 2-day institute. It's a big deal because we had raised money to do this work. It was lots of schools. And I just looked over at this guy and I said to him, it's been 2 full days. Like, what do you think? Can we do this work here? And he stood up, he looked around the room, he looked at me, and he just started crying. And he said, thank you for giving me permission to feel. And so it was in that moment I realized, that that was the book I had to write. Because I think what's so important for all of us, especially during these very challenging times, we're living in unprecedented times in terms of, from back in March with COVID-19, and the anxiety levels in our nation are the highest they've ever been before. And the recent protests and, murders and, the challenges that we're facing with structural racism in our country and elsewhere. If we don't give ourselves and the people that we love, and even the people we don't love, the permission to feel, I'm not sure, what else we can do at this point. So my hope is that this will be a powerful journey for you, that, we're going to learn together. I should say that right now I am in learning mode. I hope that you'll be in that learning mode with me. And as much as I want to give you and myself the permission to feel, I also want to give you and myself the permission to fail and to forgive. So with that, what I thought we'd do to get started is jump into chapter 1. And chapter 1 really focuses on this question of, how are you feeling? And I want to just read a little bit from the book to help us just get our evening going. So here we go. I've never read my book online before, so let's see what happens. Whenever I speak to a group, I start by asking people to spend a few minutes thinking about how they're feeling, right in the moment. Then I call on them to share, which I'll be doing with you in a moment. Their answers reveal a lot, not necessarily about the emotions, but about our difficulty in discussing our emotional lives. What I find is that we don't even have the vocabulary to describe our feelings in useful detail. 3/4 of the people have a hard time coming up with a feeling word. When the words do come, they usually don't tell us very much. People fumble around a bit, hem and haw, and then use the most commonplace terms we all rely on. Fine, good, okay. It makes you wonder, do I even know how I'm feeling? Have I given myself permission to ask? Have I ever really asked my partner, my child, my colleague? Today, when nearly every question can be answered instantly by Siri or Google or Alexa, we're losing the habit of pausing to look inward or to one another for answers. But even Siri doesn't know everything. And Google can't tell you why your son or daughter is feeling hopeless or excited, or why your significant other feels not so significant lately, or why you can't shake the chronic low-level anxiety that plagues you. It makes perfect sense that we're uncomfortable and awkward when expressing our emotional lives. This is true even when we're experiencing positive feelings, but it's especially so when they're unpleasant, sad, resentful, scared, rejected. Those all connect us to our weaknesses, and who wants to show those off? The instinct to protect ourselves by hiding our vulnerability is natural. Even animals in the wild do it. It's self-preservation, pure and simple. And yet we all ask this question, or something like it, countless times a day. And we're called on to answer it just as often. How are you? How are you doing? How are you feeling? We ask it so reflexively that we scarcely hear ourselves. And we answer in the same spirit. Great, thanks. How are you? Everything's fine. Busy. Without pausing for even a second to think before we reply. It's one of the great paradoxes of the human condition. We ask some variation of the question, how are you feeling, over and over, which would lead one to assume that we attach some importance to it. And yet we never expect or desire or provide an honest answer. So that's the heart, of this work that we're going to do together. Why is it that each day we say, hey, how's it going? How are you feeling? And we say, fine, okay, I'm busy. Do we ever really provide an honest response? Think about that. And, You know, it's funny, I was doing a workshop for families recently online, and somebody asked, well, I don't have time to ask my kid, how they're feeling. I'm like, you don't have time to ask your kid how they're feeling? Well, I got work to do and I got this to happen. I mean, think about it in the typical days, right? It's 7:30 in the morning. If you're a parent, you've got to get in your car by 7:45. The kid got to get on a bus, and you pause and you stop and you say to your partner, your friend, your child, like, how you feeling? And they don't say fine. They say, I'm feeling anxious, overwhelmed, scared, lonely. And so what I wanted to share with you about that specific um, instance is that recently our center has done some pretty big studies on what are the emotions that people are feeling these days. And I'm here to tell you that among adults, the number one emotion is anxiety. And one of our largest studies, we've done now 7,000 people in this project, the number one emotion that people came up with to describe how they were feeling right here, right now, was anxious. When we asked parents, well, what are the feelings that your kids are having? We found out the number one emotion was boredom, then frustration, then loneliness, confusion, scared. And so let's think about this right now. We are a nation, right, that is filled with a lot of those red and blue emotions. So if you read my book, you know the mood meter, right? We'll talk more about that another date, but that red and the blue, we're a nation that is just filled with red and blue emotions. And we have these weird messages that we're just supposed to say fine and okay or busy when we're not. And then we get these other weird messages, that we're supposed to be happy all the time. I think there are more books on happiness than there are people on this webinar. We've got a lot of people on right now. And what's the message there, right? Like right now, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling anxious. I'm overwhelmed. And what am I supposed to do with those feelings? Am I supposed to not feel them and go to happy or be calm or lie and just say I'm, fine and busy? So that's the first thing I'm going to ask us to think about right now together. Just take a pause and take an inhale and an exhale maybe, and just bring yourself into the moment. What is the goal of this work? What is the goal of having an emotional life? If we are really feeling anxious and overwhelmed, and our kids are really feeling frustrated and bored and lonely and scared, what are we supposed to do with that information? And I think the messages are that we're supposed to downregulate or shift into happiness. And I want to say right now, just at the beginning of this book club journey with all of you, that I think that's profoundly wrong. I think the first step in all of this is, guess what? Giving ourselves the permission to feel. Right? Our feelings, they come unbidden, right? We don't ask for them, they are just here. And so if we don't give ourselves the permission to just experience these feelings and express them, how do we ever learn how to manage them? And I think the other important thing here is that the message of like, I got to get into that yellow quadrant, I got to be happy, it's also misguided. Like, I'll be honest with you. Like, as I've said, right now I am angry, really angry. I'm feeling hopeless some days. I'm feeling anxious most days. And I'm the director of the freaking Center for Emotional Intelligence. Shouldn't I be happy all the time? Well, let me tell you one thing. I'm a neurotic Jewish professor. I'm never going to be happy. I beg for like contentment, well-being. And I say this because I think the messages, that we've learned through life is that these red and blue, these so-called negative emotions are bad emotions. That anxiety means you're weak. Loneliness and fear means you're weak. And what if we just threw that out completely? And what if we just said all emotions are acceptable? That there's no such thing as a bad emotion. I'm going to repeat that the primary goal of permission to feel is to accept the notion that all emotions are okay. That our goal doesn't have to be to shift out of the feeling. That we can all be angry right now. That we can all feel anxious right now. And that it's okay. How relieving is that? That we can give ourselves the permission to experience these feelings and not have to be struggling with how to get out of them. That we don't have to have or allow those emotions to have power over us. Think about that. That we can be with our emotions and not give the power over to them to take over our everyday lives. So I'm just going to have you sit with that for a moment, please. Maybe take a nice inhale and an exhale. And the next time, you think about asking someone, so how are you feeling? Ask yourself, do I really want to hear the response? Am I willing to listen? Think about that for a moment. Are you willing to be honest and authentic about how you're feeling? And I think that's the other piece of permission to feel that we're going to talk about tonight, which is the idea that when we share how we're feeling, right, there should be some expectation that the other person is going to listen and be there for us. And as you know, from reading at least my book, the beginning of my book, I was blessed in life to have an Uncle Marvin. And I argue, and I have a career because of my uncle, and I am alive and healthy because of my Uncle Marvin, because he did give me the permission to feel. As you know, I had some trauma in my childhood. I was abused by a neighbor for many years. I didn't go into detail in my book about that because my book is not about that, but it was pretty serious trauma in my childhood. The abuser threatened me that if I shared what was happening, I would be harmed, my family would be harmed. So I'm trapped with these feelings. I had two parents who loved me a lot. I had a mom, but she was very anxious. So she was like, oh my God, don't tell me I have a breakdown. That was about anything. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to tell my mother that I'm being bullied and all this terrible stuff is happening because she'll have a breakdown. And my father was a tough guy from the Bronx, and he said, son, you're toughen up, son. And so, I mean, look at me. I do have a 5th degree black belt, by the way. I'm still not a tough guy. I never became the tough guy. And so I learned that I can't tell my dad very much about how I'm feeling because he's going to tell me to toughen up. And then I was blessed with an Uncle Marvin. He was my mother's brother. He was the originator of this work back in the 60s and 70s in the Catskill Mountains of New York. And he would sit with me and just ask me questions. How are you feeling? And when he asked that question, he paused. And he didn't say, well, toughen up, kid, get some grit. You gotta get some grit, otherwise you're never gonna make it. He said, well, what can I do to support you? Let's really name these feelings. Let's get them out. Is it alienation? Is it isolation? Is it despair? Let's really talk about it. And guess what? It's okay. So let me pause there and just ask you, potentially a profound question, I'm not sure. Who gave you the permission to feel? Did you have someone that gave you the permission to be your full feeling self? And when you think about that person, what were their characteristics? How would you describe that person that gave you the permission to feel, or the person who you wished had given you the permission to feel? What words would you use to describe them? People tell me things like non-judgmental, caring, compassionate, good listener, right? All the skills that we should all develop so that we can be honest and authentic with that simple question of how are you feeling? So I've gotten a number of questions from people, and we've decided to invite one guest actually on the show. Her name is Jill Siegel. And Ryan, who is helping me behind the scenes, is going to help bring Jill on. And let's see what Jill has to share or ask.
Hi.
Hi, Jill. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
This is pretty cool. Like meeting new people on my virtual book club. So tell me, where are you from, by the way?
I'm in New York City.
Awesome. So tell me, what's your question?
So you were talking about Uncle Marvin, and I was really so taken about your stories about Uncle Marvin and how he had such a profound impact on you and created all of this really by listening and just loving you unconditionally. And, I was just wondering whether you had any kind of specific tips for how to become an Uncle Marvin for others when, when they don't have emotional intelligence developed yet.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And it's funny because when I was on my book tour, which was last fall when the book first came out, I was traveling around, and I don't always share. I never went into as much detail as I do now about my Uncle Marvin because most of my talks were professional talks about like, the research and things like that. And now in my book, I've gotten a lot more personal. And I just want to say that it took me until I was 50 years old to tell my true story. Um, my closest family members know about my childhood abuse, but I was never really felt safe or comfortable to share that experience. And I've been asked for so many years now, like, why do you do this work really? And what I would say is that my uncle gave me a voice, right? He was the only adult with whom I felt safe and comfortable. And I felt like I had to be like my true self had to come out, when I'm writing this book. I couldn't just like not share that, yes, I was bullied and I hated being bullied and no one should experience the bullying that I endured. It was terrible. But it goes deeper than that. It goes deep to the point that I was silenced as a child. And so when I think about what you're saying, it reminds me of this. I'm on this tour and somebody said to me, Mark, gosh, your uncle Marvin was a hero, for you. He was your savior. And I said, absolutely right. And then they said to me, and for whom are you the Uncle Marvin? And of course, I almost started crying. I probably did cry because I realized that I'm not giving what my uncle gave me. And it was a real wake up call to me, meaning that I got so much from my Uncle Marvin. I mean, I got purpose, I got passion, I mean, a career, I got love and support. And whenever I had challenges, and even in my early adult life, my father and I would get into huge fights about my sexuality, my mother about my career. And, the person I would call was Uncle Marvin. And I'm like, nobody calls me for, and why is that? You know, and so what I'm saying basically is that so much of life, we take just because, that's what we're in many ways programmed to do. And the question I have for myself and for everyone here is, what research actually shows is the givers are happier than the takers. So it's a mindset, I think. And I think we have to give ourselves the permission to pause, the permission to not work all the time, to be productive. I'm a professor at a place like Yale. I got to be productive. I got to publish, and I'm really drastically rethinking my whole life in terms of exactly this question is like, all right, like now maybe it's time to give back. And so I think it's a mindset around that. I would say also that these are aspirational characteristics, like being non-judgmental. Like this is like vigilant self-awareness, right? Am I judgmental or am I kind and compassionate? Am I a good listener or am I the knower, right?
Right.
Am I critical or am I curious? And so, Jill, I went on and on with your question, but what I would say is that it takes a lot of reflection to just think about like the characteristics of that Uncle Marvin character, and then a commitment to just giving back. I don't know
Thank
if it's
you.
helpful or not.
Well, you Uncle Marvin'd me.
There you go.
See? I
It was
mean,
lovely to meet you, and I'm grateful that you have read the book and are here. So
I love it. Thank you so much.
thank you. So I got some other questions, and what I wanted to share with you is this one, which I think is really relevant to our current circumstances. This is from a woman named Shannon. And she wrote, how do you approach this from the standpoint of someone who's, emotionally dysregulated a lot, in a constant state of fight and flight, you know? And what I'll share with you is that I completely get it. And because I am that person, I want to say a few things about this. The first is I want us to not confuse our experience of emotion with the skills that we all need to develop to use our emotions wisely. So as someone who has had a lot of anxiety in his life, who cried a lot and was uncomfortable a lot because of so many things that happened, I just thought, without even knowing what the heck emotional intelligence was as a kid, that I was just going to be this bundle of emotional volatility. Then, of course, I become a scientist and I do the science. And what we show in our research is that our experience of emotion, like people high in neuroticism, which is a personality trait, which is where you're a little bit moody. That's what I got. That I could still be skilled at dealing with my feelings. Let me say that again. You can be someone who is emotionally kind of volatile, but also be skilled at it. I mean, think about it. I have all the opportunities in the world to practice my strategies because I'm like experiencing a lot of intense emotions all day long. So what does that mean? Well, we're jumping ahead a little bit because in the next few sessions, we're going to go deeply into the skills. But what I want to say for Shannon and for everyone on the line is that we're going to accept the fact that we have these feelings. I've accepted the fact that I startle very easily. I'm moody all the time, but I don't allow that to have the power over me. First, accept it. The second step is to ask yourself questions. Become curious about the experience. Are you anxious? Are you fearful? Are you overwhelmed? Are you stressed? What's the difference? So this is getting now into the skills of ruler. And what I find, again, we're not very skilled at articulating our specific experiences. So what I mean, again, is that I'm stressed. I found that with my Yale students. Everybody said they were stressed. And then I had them journal for weeks on weeks about their stressors. And here's what I found. They're actually envious. All their examples of what made them stressed were about social comparisons. All of their stressors were about social comparisons. Okay, so think about that for a minute. They're going, and then they go to the health center. This is one of my favorite stories. And because I'm a little bit of a rebel rouser here. And I go to the health center, I'm like, everybody says, oh, well, we have mindfulness, everybody's breathing. I'm like, that's great. I do mindfulness too. We have yoga. And I said, that's great. But can we go, like what I'm finding though, is that their actual experiences, they're saying they're stressed, but they're envious. So what are we doing to help them reduce their envy? And they looked at me like a deer in headlights, like, what are you talking about? I said, well, I don't know, like, where's the research which shows that downward dog reduces envy? I was not very popular that day on my campus. But what I'm getting at here is that we really have to name our feelings first, because then it's a pathway towards regulating them. Hope that helps. So try to understand what's going on for you underneath the feeling, because the strategies that you would use to manage envy are probably very different than the ones you would manage the anxiety, for example, that we're having right now. Let's be real. The anxiety that we're experiencing right now, many of us, we have three things going on. We're thinking about A, this is uncontrollable. I have no control over my environment. I have no control over the coronavirus. I have no control over the protesting. I have no control. B, it's unpredictable. I don't know. I just can't predict. C, it feels like it's gonna never go away. And when you're feeling that way as a human being, where it's uncontrollable and unpredictable and like it's gonna last forever, what happens is our brains default to a lot of catastrophic thinking. Think about that. Our brains default to a lot of catastrophic thinking. The stock market, oh my God, it's over. You know, everybody's gonna get coronavirus. And in those moments, what I ask you to do is first support yourself in deactivating. This is where the mindfulness work really comes in handy. As a matter of fact, 7:35 p.m. in Eastern Daylight Time. How about we do a little breathing right now to deactivate? Maybe we can take a nice inhale and a nice exhale. People often think that mindfulness and breathing is a religious practice. I promise all of you that no matter what your religion is, no matter what country you were born in, you were breathing when you were born and you will breathe. And so breathing is for all people, right? You don't have to have your hands in a certain posture or anything like that. Just want to bring ourselves into the present moment with a nice inhale and an exhale to deactivate, to be more present. So for Shannon, I'm a little bit all over the place, but I want to clarify. A, accept the feelings. Don't think that you have to change yourself forever, please. I've been living with these feelings my whole life and I've been okay, because it's a mindset, right? Anxiety is bad, anxiety is okay. That alone can be freeing. It's okay to be anxious. Wow. The second is, am I really anxious? Or am I envious? Or am I fearful? Or am I stressed? Or am I overwhelmed or apprehensive? So get granular, get specific with your words. And then you can find a strategy. And we're going to get into emotion regulation a lot over the next coming weeks. But I would say the first strategy to just work on is the breathing to help you deactivate. And secondly, the cognitive strategy of self-talk, positive self-talk. Just monitor what you're saying to yourself and challenge the catastrophic thinking you're having. So, you know, for me, it was like around turbulence years ago because I fly a lot and, oh my God, the plane's gonna crash. And oh my God, we're flying into clouds. It's raining out, it's bumpy. And my cousin is a pilot and he's like, Mark, there's never been a plane crash because of turbulence. I'm like, are you kidding me? He's like, no, so you mean I've been wasting all these years like having this catastrophic thinking that like I'm gonna die because of the bumps and he's like, yeah, it's just air. So think about that. Information, right, was then able to help me challenge my catastrophic thinking. And I'd say, well, Mark, your cousin Richard told you there's never been a crash because of turbulence. Oh, okay, now I can be still. So I'm gonna stop there for a moment, ask everyone to just breathe in and breathe out. Bring yourself back into the present moment. You know, someone else asked me, you know, what do you think would have happened if Uncle Marvin would not have been there for you at some point? And I think to myself, my goodness, like, I really don't know. Because, you know, one of the deeper stories is that he would ask me literally to type his lessons, you know, when I was a kid. And I think that really just got ingrained in, you know, in my soul. And when I was in my mid-20s, anxious and scared about my future and not knowing what I was going to do, and I'm in therapy, I realized that all the things that Uncle Marvin was doing with me 10 years prior was the things that I needed to do for my life then. That's when I pulled my uncle out of retirement, and we wrote an entire article. I'm hearing from our producers in the background that there are some connection issues. I apologize for that. Unfortunately, I have no control over that, so I'm going to let it go. I apologize that you can't let it go, but we're going to record this, and this is going to be on YouTube, and you'll all get a recording of it. So we're working on it, and obviously this will be recorded the way it's being done here on Zoom, so it'll be high quality, and we'll make sure you get it. A few last things before we close out. I want to just read one more section from the book, because I think this is really relevant to our current circumstances. And it's the end of chapter 1. And it says, we all want lives. We all want our lives and the lives of the people we love to be free of hardship and troubling events. We can never make that happen. We all want lives to be filled with healthy relationships, compassion, and a sense of purpose. That we can make happen. Uncle Marvin showed me how. It starts with the permission to feel, the first step in the process. So my hope is that this first night with me was enjoyable, that you had an opportunity to just think a little bit more, about the concepts of, 1, permission to feel. What does that mean to you? What does that mean for you as a parent, as a child, as a lover, as a sibling, as a colleague? 2, that we're not going to judge feelings, that we're going to think of emotions as being information, which is going to be something we talk about next week. That emotions are information. They're not good or bad. They're just experiences that we all have. And that this question of how are you feeling, right? It takes courage to ask it, because you really have to listen to the response if you're going to build meaningful relationships. And so just try to think about how that goes for you over the next week when you ask that question, so how are you feeling? And when people ask you that question, ask yourself, am I bullshitting right now? Or am I being open and honest and authentic? And if I'm not being open and honest and authentic with the person, what might be that reason? So much work, but I promise you it's worth it. So what's coming up next? Well, next week we are going to be jumping into chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 2 is the heavy one on science. So chapter 2 is about the role of emotions in attention and learning and decision-making and relationships and health and creativity and our everyday performance. And then chapter 3 introduces this concept of how do we become emotion scientists like Uncle Marvin, as opposed to emotion judges. And then I start introducing, the basics of what's an emotion versus a mood versus a feeling, and what gets really sciencey there. And then what are the beginnings, of our development of these 5 key emotion skills. And lastly, what I say is that I was thinking that this could be a fun research project for all of us. So I'm going to create a survey that is opt-in, of course. It's totally optional. And if you want to go on a permission to feel journey with me by completing some surveys about your own emotions and the strategies that you're using to regulate your own feelings, I'm going to send you that survey, and you can track yourself over the course of the next 6 weeks. And then we can see, what are you learning? And how is this work supporting you in building your health, helping you to build and maintain the best possible relationships, and achieve all of your goals right now. So to conclude, I'm going to ask us all to just get some good posture. Take an inhale and an exhale. And set your intention. And I always joke that if I was a magician or had a wizard, that I have this bag of dust and glitter, and I would just be and I give you the permission to feel, and I give you the permission to feel. But I say that from the bottom of my heart, that my hope is that my book is a useful guide to you, especially during these challenging times, and that I hereby grant you all the permission to feel. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And have a great rest of the week and weekend. Bye, everybody. Thank you.